Welcome to the podcast Artificial Art. My name is Steinar Jeffs. I'm a musician and a music teacher, and in this podcast I'll be interviewing guests about technology and creativity. So welcome, Maya Ackerman.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
First of all, you have a unique background that combines computer science and music. I would like you to maybe begin by telling about your journey into AI and the intersection with songwriting and kind of what inspired you to explore this blend.
Yeah, I studied machine learning in graduate school for my master's and PhD, theoretical foundations of cluster analysis, very math heavy. Honestly, it never entered the field of AI because it was popular. It was sort of in a less popular branch of AI back in the time of machine learning, looking very much at the mathematical foundations. But it so happened that I came across an opera singer who lived in Waterloo, where I studied, and I started taking lessons from her, and ended up falling in love with opera singing. Started performing semi-professionally. So this happened in parallel to my PhD, which was really fun. And I never really thought that I wanted these two worlds to collide. I kind of felt that they needed to stay separate. But in 2014, I attended a workshop called Information Theory and Applications. It was in San Diego, and there was this little session, three talk session called Computational Creativity. And I remember making a mental note to attend it. And there was Harold Cohen screaming about how people were calling his automated painter creative, but really he's the creative one. He's the creative mind. And I did not have a side, but I thought it was fascinating that there was a machine painter and somebody was thinking about whether it was creative. And there were a couple of other amazing speakers in that session, Jeraine and Mark Riddell and Jeraine Wiggins, and they told me about computational creativity as a field, and I just fell in love with it. I just fell in love with the idea of machines creating, machines making art, machines helping people make art, and very, very quickly came up with the project that will end up becoming my company, which was originally coming up with vocal melodies given lyrics. So if I say something like, I'd love to visit Norway, let's say, then how many ways can you sing it? I mean, it's a universe, right? Like, I'd love to visit Norway, or I'd love to visit Norway, right? So it helped me explore these possibilities, and the rest is history.
So you kind of came from the technical side first and then into music simultaneously.
Some people say that their path found them. I definitely tend to feel this way, that my path found me.
And you were just starting to talk a bit about it, that you started a company and made kind of a tool to generate melodies. Could you tell a bit about that company?
Yeah. So it started off with that specific model. So we built a machine learning model that did that, took lyrics and came up with different ways to sing them. And I found that to be so helpful. I still remember we printed it on paper and we had this kind of funky notation because the interface didn't matter, right? We didn't need to serve it to users. And I remember sitting by my piano and sort of deciphering that notation and playing it out on the piano. And almost instantly, like, my songwriting was transformed. Suddenly I could see so many more melodic possibilities than before. And so it was clear pretty quickly that we have something here that could help more people. And but it still took us about 3 years to actually open up a Silicon Valley startup. I remember sitting by my computer and filling out the paperwork to open up WaveAI, and it said company name, and I'm like, oh, we didn't even think about the name, and I came up with WaveAI sort of on the spot. in 2017, before all the companies were something AI. So that was really fun. But overall, it's been a complicated journey. It has not been straightforward at all. Raising money, running a company, hiring people, advertising. There is so much to learn to running a business. Even if you have incredible technology, it's a very steep learning curve.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a whole new world. But what about the technical and creative challenges when designing an AI to be a collaborator? Um, what kind of challenges did you face?
Um, I think it really expedited having a business, serving real users, really helped shape how I think about what AI should be. I was always into co-creative. I loved the idea, like instantly. I loved the idea that um, a machine can be a co-creative partner. I heard this phrase at the International Conference on Computational Creativity. Somebody said it in passing during the first talk that I attended. And I was sold at that moment. Wow, yes, of course, a machine can be a co-creative partner. How did I not think about it myself? Um, but that could mean so many different things. It could mean that it does most of it, and then I change it up a little bit. Or it could mean that I do almost everything and it just helped me in those two little areas. Or it could mean everything in between. It could mean that let's say if I'm writing a song, it could mean that it helped with mastering and mixing and composition and lyrics and vocalization. Or it could mean that it just helped with one of them, let's say the lyrics. Or it did all of those things, but just for the hook, right? I mean, it's just like working with another person. It could mean so many different things. And the more we served real people, the more I started understanding that the person needs to be in the driver's seat. And ultimately, it's all about, if done right, it's all about elevating human capability. So that even if you step away from the machine, you are now more capable, more creative, or smarter than you were before in that domain.
Does Wave AI do that for you?
So, our sort of bread and butter, our most successful product is LyricStudio, and that was actually our third product. So we started off with tools that, well, in different ways, we hit some stuff right, some stuff not quite right with our first two products. And LyricStudio helps only with lyrics, and it does it really well. It does it in a way that makes people better pen and paper lyricists. And this takes a certain attitude towards your users. This takes a certain trust. So our product is helpful for people all across the expertise spectrum. It's helpful for beginners and it's helpful for people who are, stars or at the extreme end of professional because it's a very, very flexible system. It can inspire you or it can hold your hand more. It's sort of anything in between. Um, but we sort of don't foster dependence in a way that perhaps some other AI products try to do. So we are okay with the fact that all of our users really become better at lyrics writing. And a lot of them choose to stick around even though they're better because the product is still helpful. And it's a certain attitude towards our users where we want to build this kind of, if you will, healthy relationship with them, where we want to empower them, we want to make them better, and we trust that enough of them are going to stick around, right? That we don't need to make them dependent on us. We don't need to make their songwriting, impossible without LyricStudio. We don't want that. Kind of like a little analogous to like a healthy partner. An unhealthy partner might want to make you dependent on them, get rid of all your friends, make it so that you can survive without them or something. All kind of abusive patterns. Whereas a healthy partner will want you to be strong and independent and capable and happy and trust that you will keep choosing them, essentially. And that's kind of a vague analogy to the approach that we're taking that I really think more of the industry needs to take.
Do you feel like that's the difference between using Lyric Studio and using ChatGPT, for instance?
So I actually have a very positive attitude towards ChatGPT, just for other use cases. I uh, I love ChatGPT. I'm an avid user. I'm a paid user, um, and I think it's precisely because for a lot of use cases you get this kind of experience. I call this broadly humble creative machines. So, for example, if I'm writing, text, not poetry but prose, it can be really fun to experiment with different styles, to ask it to modify something. It's amazing at coming up with titles, and in many contexts you can have this kind of iterative experience with ChatGPT. But with lyrics, it's just not. I guess it just hasn't been a focus area. And fundamentally, when you're writing lyrics, if you are doing it as an art, right? Um, then you need to be creating, and ChatGPT sort of creates the whole thing for you all at once, which is a little too much. Imagine you're collaborating with a person on lyrics, and you're saying, "Oh, I want to write about a sunny day, a sunny December day in California," right? It reminds me, of some childhood experience, and your friend just writes the whole thing right away. You're not really writing together. It's too much. And it might not be even the style that you want. ChatGPT is very rigid in its lyrical style. And again, I don't mean this as a profound criticism of ChatGPT. It's not a core use case for them. They focus more on business use cases and other things. So it's very different from ChatGPT. Our product is really geared for that lyrics writing experience, whereas ChatGPT has a lot of other use cases that is just phenomenal at.
That's really interesting. The fact that it could provide too much information, as you were saying, is like, yeah, if you collaborate with someone and they really loudly and takes the word for a long time, too long time. So you get, I guess you will in LyricStudio you will get shorter samples of sentences or words that are more inspirational.
Yeah, so it's a one line at a time model. We do have something that can draft something a bit longer for you if you really want that support, which sometimes you do to kind of like get going. But it's a very simple looking experience, right? So, by the way, users like simple, for good reason, right? We have enough complexity in our lives. User interfaces need to be simple and straightforward. And so you have your notepad, which takes more space than anything else, inviting you to focus on your own writing. And then on the side, you have suggestions, one-line suggestions that take into account everything you've written, the topics you've selected, and you can tap into them at any time, into these suggestions. And you can also ignore them at any time, which is really, really important. You don't want to feel like at every moment you need to be thinking about the AI, because once you tap into your own creative process, and our users tell us that a lot, one line can sometimes get two-thirds of the song done because it sends them on this creative journey. They're tapping into their own well, and you just start writing, boom, 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 boom. You write, you write, you write. You get stuck again. Oh, okay. Let's look at more suggestions. Right? It's that back and forth and keeping you in control. It's like, I mean, I really want to give you this analogy. So let's say I tell you that Alex made me more creative. Alex being a person. Does it mean that Alex wrote a song for me? Probably not. Does it mean that I gave it a prompt and then it wrote a song for me? Well, no, that would be really weird, right? It also doesn't mean that I'm now dependent on Alex. If Alex made me more creative, I became more creative, even if I never see Alex again, which means that there is a certain, which means that my creative process, my capabilities were front and center. And so you need to create this sort of experience with AI if you want to genuinely benefit people. I mean, we are a small company and we are able to have a lot of users in a landscape that has a lot of AI tools. And that really shows how important it is to prioritize your users and really their long-term well-being, if you will.
Of AI being a creative collaborator or inspirator, are there any areas where you find the AI to be lacking in terms of creative potential?
Oh, everywhere. Everywhere there's possibilities. I'm kind of simultaneously in awe of what other people are building, and at the same time, I see this. this potential to make the system so much more useful by focusing more on empowering people and less on demonstrating how cool AI is. I call it humble creative machines. You can have the most brilliant human being, but sometimes it's more appropriate for them, like, for example, as teachers in the classroom, um, or as managers, to pull their genius back a little bit and utilize it to enrich, and help elevate other people. And that's really, really key in human society. And we actually get very upset at other people when they're too arrogant, even if their brilliance, quote unquote, justifies it somehow, right? And so that's what's happening with AI. I mean, it's genuinely amazing what it can do. I mean, look at text to image models. But if you haven't, by the way, you've got to try Midjourney. I mean, I have no connection to that company, but the technology is incredible.
Yeah, agreed.
And I love it. I love it so much that I use it. I use it even though it's hard to use. But it's really not designed with the idea of giving a person control. They eventually built in painting, but even that's still difficult to use. And you can sort of take a picture and ask it to modify it, but it modifies it how it wants. More than half the time, it doesn't understand what I want. And that, despite being a wonderful system that I love. I love Midjourney. Again, I'm a paying user of that system, but it's there's so much left on the table because the AI needs to be built from the ground up in a way that considers that lets the user become the driver, and that's missing. And as a result, it's missing a lot of commercial opportunity and a lot of opportunity to enrich human lives.
And why is that the case, do you think?
I think it's just a way of thinking about things. I think sometimes as consumers, and I'm sure that happens to me all the time in industries where I'm not an expert, we just assume that it has to be this way. It's this way because there's no other way to build it. But it's just not true. It's just not true. I'm not saying it would be easy to take something like a text to image model and make it and put the user in the driver's seat and make it easy to interact with that system and make it so the user could realize their vision more completely and be understood by that model. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's possible. And so from a business perspective too, I think business leaders, investors need to begin appreciating that ChatGPT succeeded because it enables these experiences for people. Before we had ChatGPT, we had these other models called like large language models. We had, for example, GPT-2. You would give it a line of text and it would come up with a paragraph to follow up that line of text. And it was fun, but you couldn't really interact with it. You couldn't explain your intent. You couldn't iterate with it on a block of text. And so, it really wasn't that popular. It was somewhat popular, but it wasn't ChatGPT popular. And then they did this alignment process, which was a significant investment. Alignment is difficult and complicated, and they made a massive investment in that. And they made it into something that humans can interact with. And it blew up. It blew up. So there is evidence that making the communication between human and machine front and center, giving the human control, can lead to massive success. And we need more of that.
In my own experience with ChatGPT as well, that's really the case after the possibility of making custom GPTs came out. That's really when the usage of it exploded on my part. Because, for instance, with these podcast episodes, I can now transcribe the episodes and I upload the text to one of my custom GPTs. And for the first 15 episodes, I wrote my own show notes and intros and stuff like that. And I also uploaded all those intros. And then I can use this custom GPT to generate show notes for new episodes based on the transcript and my earlier show notes. So it's like in my style, but also it takes into the consideration all the information of each episode, which is really handy. And it also kind of speaks to what you're saying. It's like the dialogue and the customization aspect that really makes it interesting. And that's probably something that's missing in a lot of the generative AI music tools. Although it seems like they're trying though, because both Suno and Udio has in-painting options. Although they don't really work that well in my experience for now, at least. It's like, at least for professional musicians, we kind of desire even more control. I need to have like fingertip control of every aspect, including like which frequency should be cut out on the snare on the bridge the second time around. Like it has to be that detailed. So in my own experiences and also my students who have tried out these softwares, the best possibility for now is to use them more as a sample database, because then you still have control afterwards.
Yeah. I like what you're saying. I think it's uh, I think what you're saying is the rule, not the exception, actually. This experience that you're having of like, oh, you're not giving me enough control is the common experience of frustration with AI system, which actually tends to lead to low retention. So the whole AI industry is notorious for low retention, kind of like one-hit wonders. People use it 1, 2, 3 times and then never come back, often just once. And so giving users control is how you overcome that. And I think companies are not taking this issue of control seriously enough, even though everyone complains about it. Well, everyone, just about everyone complains about it. And it needs to be taken so seriously that it should impact how you build your models from the beginning. And when you're not doing it, it's like taking a cooked dish and trying to improve it afterwards. It's like, forget about it. Forget about it. It's too hard. That's why you're saying it's there, but it's not really there. But that's not good enough, you know. And I so much respect for my Suno and Udio did, just like for Midjourney. So I really mean it in a kind of like, I mean, let's do it even better. We have something really cool now. Let's make it useful for people.
The cooked dish analogy really hit it with me. It's like when you have you cook a meal and it's too much salt on it, and it's like you can't go back on that, or at least it's really difficult.
Like, let's think about a baby, right? We don't teach the baby how to be smart and then teach it to interact with the world. It learns everything by interacting with the world. Interaction is central. And these models are taught to be smart. And then people, and then the makers are like, oh my God, now I need to give it to users. And these users keep asking for more stuff, right? So it kind of, we just need to think about it correctly. And when we think about stuff correctly, then we can serve people better.
And how would you go about doing that, building up a model from the start that takes this into consideration?
We have an approach that we figured out for that. That's definitely confidential, but I think the real kind of thing that's missing in the industry is really just there's plenty of smart people out there who can figure out solutions. I have no doubt that there is sort of a lot to discover also still left, and a lot of different approaches that can be explored on the technical side. But it's really mostly the intent and desire to take that seriously enough to make massive investments in that dimension of the tools that is sort of the missing element, and not so much the technical know-how is something that's
That's a trade secret.
yeah, no, yeah, I can't share it on a podcast, but it's unfortunately because it's this relates to my company. But this is something that I think is something that we as an industry can figure out across many different domains. I mean, OpenAI figured it out for ChatGPT how to align a large language model, and that was a massive accomplishment. And in other industries, I mean, the complexity level is similar. It's not. In some sense, it's a little harder, but in some sense, it's actually a little simpler. Apologies that I can provide something meaty for this question.
So I've read some articles that you've written, and in one of them you discuss something called a theory of mind, which is a kind of a framework for understanding biases in AI. And for those who hadn't read that article, Could you sum it up and explain what it is?
Yeah. Mm, this is such a cool pivot, such a fun topic. I've spent the past year thinking about in a more fundamental level, sort of, let's zoom out. Let's zoom out, okay? Zoom out of the details of our lives and our personal struggles and look at it at what's happening as a moment in humanity, right? As a moment in human history. So we had, for a long time, human beings had an oral history. We would pass on our knowledge by talking to our children, right? And then people started writing down stories and their thoughts, and their knowledge started becoming written down. And then we put it up on the internet, okay? And then we built a machine brain based on this knowledge that we put on the internet, right? And this machine brain is us. It is really an embodiment of what Carl Jung called collective consciousness. And that's wild. That is, um, that at a conceptual level opens up possibilities that were just unthinkable before. In some sense, when you interact with ChatGPT or Midjourney, you're interacting with a collective consciousness, right? You're not just interacting with OpenAI or Midjourney, with not just a product of this company. You're interacting with a mind that learned from a huge part of humanity. It's essentially found a way for us to bond with each other, to work together in a way that was just impossible before. And it's everything that's amazing about these systems, like their intelligence and their creativity, is our collective intelligence and creativity. No human being can ever hope to consume such amounts of data. No human being could ever hope to learn from such amounts of data. But now we kind of have it in our fingertips, which is why it's so important that we make these models easier to interact with, because that's sort of the remaining barrier for some of them. But there's a flip side, and I think we sort of somehow need to open our hearts and be okay with that flip side, because it's just reality. And that's the shadow. It's what Carl Jung called the shadow. And each one of us has a shadow. We have this part of ourselves that we prefer to deny. It's a part that was unacceptable in our family or in our culture, in our society. And it could be even a talent. Maybe somebody is amazing at sports, but they're in a family that really devalues that and only values academic strength. And so that person had to put that talent in their shadow. Or maybe it's anger. Maybe your family didn't let you be angry. Maybe you're a strong woman and strong women are not allowed in your society, right? So it's kind of like the shadow can have all kind of traits that are not necessarily good or bad, that just weren't allowed. They're just not acceptable in your world for whatever reason. And it's the same with the collective, right? Our world is incredibly sexist and racist and ageist. I mean, it's just a fact. If you look at people who study this, this is not this is not debatable in reality. Um, but it's also, these are also unacceptable traits, so we think we don't have them. We have them while thinking we don't have them, so they're in our shadow. And because these models are trained on our data, they reveal our biases very creatively. If you look at the text to image models, it's really fascinating, if you tap into this, how creatively it visualizes our biases. And so instead of saying, how dare the machine have biases? Who do we blame? Let's yell at the developers and the entrepreneurs and the CEOs, right? Which is kind of the reflex reaction. I think what's even more profound, while improving the AI is a nice goal, but it's very, very complicated for many reasons. The more fundamental thing, really, what we should be thinking about first, thinking about the AI should come second. What we should be thinking about first is, how do we improve humanity? Um, and it's kind of like an opportunity for us to look in the mirror, recognize the bias within ourselves, so we can have a better humanity first and a better AI second.
And do you think, or how do you think, this mirror can help humanity get better?
We want to run some experiments on that. Um, trying to think, which example should I give you? I've done quite a bit of research on this. So one example, kind of the most, kind of the simplest to share, I guess, is our study of brilliance bias. So, I mean, I invite you and the audience to think for yourself, who comes to mind when I say the word genius? Most likely, most of you thought of Albert Einstein initially, but if not, you probably thought of some other guy. That's because our culture teaches us that intellectual brilliance is a male trait. When we think of a genius, we think of a guy. Then, if we think a bit longer, we can be like, yeah, there are some smart women too. But it's a kind of like afterthought. And it actually goes deeper than it appears. Um, it develops around age 6. There were extensive studies done. The great majority of people develop brilliance bias at age 6. It's prevalent. It's kind of ubiquitous. It's in the water. It's in the air. And it causes serious problems for women trying to enter careers like musical composition, computer science, math, physics, anywhere where any jobs that we think geniuses do. We tend to favor men, and women are kind of taught that these jobs are not for them. So it's real. It's a real thing in our society. It's not very well known, but it's a very serious bias, and it's a really big problem for women and for humanity that kind of misses out on a lot of intellectual brilliance that can come from the other half of humanity. Um,
Could just jump in there for a second, because you say the brilliance bias starts at about 6 years of age,
yeah.
and you've just done studies on this. How are the studies done? Do you like ask 6-year-olds which person do you think is the smarter one, the male or female, for instance, or how was it conducted?
Yeah, good question. I love these studies. It's such good work. So one thing is pick groups. We have a game, like let's say you're a teacher and you say, or the scientist says, we're going to be playing a game for very, very smart kids, really, really smart kids. So you get to pick teams. So you pick teams for very, very smart kids. And people mostly pick, boys get picked first for those games for very, very smart kids. Another variation was, I believe it might have been done at a slightly different age, but another variation is asking people to draw very, very smart people. And when you look at kids who are about age 5, um, they draw their own gender. So girls draw girls as very, very smart people, and boys draw boys. And then once you pass the age 6, 7 barrier, everybody starts to draw boys.
That's weird. Why?
Because it's just society teaches us. I remember in my own family,
But how come you
watching.
get taught that at exactly like the age of 6?
That's a valid question. What happens? There's a lot of
You start school maybe or something?
yeah, you start well, you kind of a lot of kids are in kindergarten before that, but I definitely remember with sort of young people in my own family watching them start off without sexism, and watching sexism get poured into their heads. It's part of what makes sexism and racism and ageism and all that stuff so effective is that society pretends it's not there, right? We're told that we've made progress. We're told that things are not so bad anymore, but it's just not true. It's just not true. Probably varies a little bit between cultures. I don't want to make it completely blanket. I mean, you're from Norway, probably one of the places that kind of do the best job at equality for women. But if you kind of look at my own experience in the United States and some other places where I've lived, um, kids are taught that that boys are smarter. They're taught that very explicitly in many, many different ways. They get that message from classmates. They get that message from teachers in many ways. It's just something that just gets hammered in over and over and over and over again. And the family, even if like you're trying to raise your kids without these biases, it's almost impossible.
Hmm.
It's so pervasive in culture, and you watch a little child who's born without this stuff, and then it just gets shoved into their heads. It's terrible. It's terrible. There's a reason why um, these are serious issues. These are very, very, very serious human issues, and it's the more you start studying them and kind of reading the research, the more you're like, oh my God, it's everywhere and it's all the time. And we don't see it because we're fish in the water, because we're just so used to it. I mean, a statement like girls are just as good at math as boys is incredibly sexist, because it suggests that boys actually have some kind of an advantage, and that's better than some of the stuff you hear.
Yeah.
Um, so we started looking into AI, and when you type the word genius into Midjourney, you mostly get men. And so we did a more extensive study on that, and it's, yeah, most of these models have brilliance bias to a very, very high degree. Yeah, but in the process, it kind of gives an opportunity to self-reflect, to ask yourself, what do I think of when I think of the word genius? To kind of like remove the shame and just be honest with yourself, you know? To what extent do I imagine the same thing that the model imagines? Am I shocked to see the model create any women at all? Um, and I think if we're honest with ourselves, there's really an opportunity for growth here, because the only way that you overcome biases is to become profoundly aware of them, and then you can make a choice. Once you know what's inside your head, you can start making some conscious decisions.
So when you experience the model as a mirror of a collective human consciousness, kind of exposes the biases, so it makes it easier to see, and then you don't have to take ownership of it personally either. So then maybe it's less shame attached to admitting it.
Exactly. I mean, the shadow really operates by shame, right? Um, we cannot take full responsibility for the biases in us. It's not fair. We did not invent them. They get shoved into our head. If we really, really pay attention, the messaging is continuous. It's every single day. And so, yeah, there is no shame in having these biases. But there is pride if you're willing, there should be pride if you're willing to look within and admit them within yourself, and willing to put in the work to notice it within yourself so that you can make better decisions. Yeah, continuously wrapping it in shame, telling people they're terrible for having these biases is it's just perpetuating the problem. It's a collective problem. We as a society have this issue. It's not something that individuals invent for the most part. I mean, you have people in the extreme who work to perpetuate them, but that's really the exception. Usually the only way out is through.
And how do these biases show up in music and in the models trained on music?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, music is it's one of the most honest facets of culture, right? It's you, you want to know about a culture, listen to its music. Um, and so it's all of these biases are in the music. And the lyrics in
Yeah.
particular are sort of um, which is why co-creation is better in a way. At least put the user in the driver's seat so they can be inspired to go in a direction that they find most meaningful. Um, yeah, that's a good question. I've never actually done analysis specifically on bias in music, in generative music, but I like that. I think one of the biggest problems, one thing that sort of immediately comes to mind is a little different from um, the kind of biases we were just discussing, but sort of a lot of the model's tendency to converge towards the mean. So if you look at lyrics in ChatGPT, for example, ChatGPT does a really good job filtering out very, very obvious sort of discriminatory biases, but it's not very good at giving you diverse results for anything. And when it comes to creative tasks, one thing that's really important is to be creative, to give different ideas, to go in different directions. Um, and this kind of like bias to go towards the mean, to give you the average, to give you the most expected, is really problematic when it comes to creative things. We don't want a system that creates music to keep creating the same kind of music, to keep reinforcing only the most popular styles, only the most popular choices. And that's a different kind of risk that we face with these creative systems. And it's actually not that hard conceptually to make them do something else, to make them more exploratory. Um, but a lot of companies choose not to. And I think that's another sort of mindset shift that we need to do.
Maybe the intuition for companies is to make something that is commercially appealing instantly. So like you hit a button and you get a catchy pop song that sounds similar to what you're already hearing, and that sounds appealing for what you were mentioning earlier when it comes to retention, that the users might use it once or twice or thrice and think it's fun, and then it's over because it's not new or fresh anymore.
Yeah, it's I think we need to give more credit to our users. We need to believe in humanity a little bit more.
In Norway, we have this organization called Tono, um, which is related to copyright. It manages the rights of composers, lyricists, songwriters, and music publishers. And they've recently introduced some guidelines when it comes to working with AI as a collaborator. And these guidelines stipulates that only works with human creative input are eligible for copyright protection, and if a composition or lyrics are entirely AI generated without human contribution, they can't be registered with Tono. However, if a work combines human and AI generated elements, the human creator can register the portion, while the AI generated part is assigned to Tono AI with a specific IPI number. And I mean, I know you're not a copyright specialist, but I was wondering if you could give your thoughts on this approach, and how it might influence the way artists and AI developers collaborate.
This is not this is probably on the better end of what I've heard copyright agencies trying to do. At least it acknowledges co-creativity as a separate use case, and it's open fundamentally to different types of co-creativity. So in a very fundamental way, I think there is something very intelligent about it. The one kind of serious weakness that I hope the agency will eventually have a chance to consider is just how difficult it is to properly separate who did what when you have a profound collaboration. So just imagine trying to do it with two people to say exactly who did what. If you really work together, and even if I tell you, you and I can work on a song, but then we'll need to tell an agency exactly who did what kind of impact that could have on our creativity and our ability to work together effectively, constantly tracking who did what. So there is something in this proposal that sort of flies against the way that collaboration works. If you have a system that really can collaborate deeply and meaningfully. Um, and so I think it has that real shortcoming, and that it's going to be challenging for the most well-meaning people if they're using a really good AI system that can really collaborate with you. It's going to be challenging for them to tease that out, and in best attempts to be honest, if the system does something like mix or master, right, like something one well-defined task, then it's easy, right? Be like, I did the lyrics and whatever the melodies, and it mixed and mastered or whatever it did, right? But very often some of the best collaborative opportunities are much more interlaced. Like, let's say in my system, you and the model write lyrics, and sometimes, when you're working with a person, they can give you one little idea, but it was actually really big. We have it all the time in academia when we write papers. It's so hard to tease apart who did what. And so I think that that's actually a real hindrance to embracing quality collaborative AI systems. I know that was, of course, not the intent of the agency, but that's something that we need to take seriously. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's a challenge.
in human collaboration between musicians, there are different approaches to this kind of task, and if you're going to bicker about who did what, then yeah, this riff was mine, but yeah, you played an earlier iteration of it, and it might lead to a lot of conflict and probably stuff happening that is kind of a hindrance of creativity. So most musicians I talk to and play with usually agree beforehand that it's going to be a 50-50 split no matter what happens. Just because then it's out of the way, you don't have to think about it while collaborating or composing. And I find that to be really the way to go, because even though, let's say I'm supposed to compose something with a musician friend, and we're sitting in the same room, and I'm the only one playing, the other person isn't doing anything, it would still impact me, just the fact that the other person is there. Um, um, you could get kind of psychic about what happens, if it's like some sort of non-physical thing happening, or if it's just the mental part of having a presence of another person that makes it. But it certainly is an effect. Um, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, that would probably be the case with collaborating with AI as well. So as you were saying, it's impossible to detangle. So I'm just imagining this, because I've composed a good deal of music and registered it with Tuno, and it's completely trust based. You open a web page and then you write, okay, this song lasts for this and that long, and I have 50% of the rights, and this other person have 50% of the rights, or something. And with an AI, it would do the same. So I could hardly see myself being incentivized to giving the AI a fair share of the song, even though I know I used it in the process. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's the way to go. Anyway, at least if one were to look at it merely as a tool, because I don't giving any writing credits to my guitar either, uh, when writing stuff.
I'm actually in full agreement with you. I think if you have really good tools that you can really collaborate with, where this sort of teasing apart is not even possible, then thinking about it as a tool and trusting artists that they're engaging meaningfully is long term. That's the way to go, I think. Just because anything else, it's just not realistic. It either blocks creativity, or people are going to end up being even honest people are going to end up being unable to be transparent in this kind of context, because it's just so difficult to be transparent when it comes to collaboration on exactly who did what. It's so hard to know for anybody, listening, who's meaningfully collaborated on anything with another person. I mean, they say if you ask people what percent of the project they did, let's say you have 3 people who worked on a project, you ask each one how much percent you did, you most of the time end up with over 100% when you add it up. Um, it's just when you have this meeting of the minds, whether it's with a machine or another person, you just gotta let 1 + 1 be bigger than 2. You gotta let the magic happen. And the society, and when it comes to copyright offices, eventually I think we'll have comfort that it's okay to create this way, and that it's in no way diminishes the work. I guess it doesn't make it less of an authentic process. Because there are so many, especially as these tools evolve, there are so many ways to give even more of yourself when these tools are there to help you. And yes, sometimes somebody could cheat and use it in a silly way where they don't do anything, but I think that will show in the quality of the work.
But of course, now we're kind of getting bogged down into the details that maybe don't make as much sense, in regards to Tuno's guidelines. But what makes sense is the part of entirely AI generated music. That's kind of the point, I think, basically, especially when it comes to these large companies that obviously have trained their models on copyrighted data. And yeah, it remains to be seen what happens with trials and stuff. But what do you think about the ethical considerations when it comes to training models on copyrighted music?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? Uh, it's so tricky. It's so tricky. Um, I think the most important thing is to not be hurting artists. I don't like, even if you don't train on their data. For example, there was this whole thing with OpenAI and Scarlett Johansson, where they found somebody who sounded like her, and they were going to use Scarlett Johansson lookalike voice without using any of her data. That's also not okay, right? In the end of the day, the use case of imitating a person without their involvement, without their permission, without revenue sharing with them is unethical, regardless of how you slice this, regardless of the details of the technology, right? So I think that's the most important thing. I think we need to be able to tell AI companies the stuff that we're not okay with them doing. Part of the reason why there's so much focus on how they do it is because there's more precedent on trying to prevent companies or telling companies how to create their sauce. Um, and also, I mean, there's other issues. um, you can say that you can't train on unlicensed data, right? Let's say you have this kind of law. But then what if a company licenses 1,000,000 books for $1,000,000, right? $1 a book. Did that help any of the writers? Is any writer going to benefit from 50 cents or $1? Probably not. Who's benefiting? Organizations that have copyright to large catalogs. Is that who we're trying to protect? Maybe. I don't think that's how most people think about it. If you want artists to benefit, the companies need to pay significant amounts per piece of work. And the economics may or may not work for that. So I feel like we kind of, and I mean that respectfully. I mean, I have so much respect for creators and what they make. But sometimes a lot of the public discourse about it is really, really naive. Just because a company pays for the data doesn't mean that any meaningful money goes to the creators. And so when we fight for stuff, we need to understand what we're fighting for. Or are we secretly just trying to get rid of these companies altogether? Like, what is our real motive? Or are we trying to prevent them from imitating artists? Or are we trying to make sure that, because sometimes I feel like what the discourse is trying to go for is um, just misses a lot of important information. Anyways, I don't want to confuse the audience. I'm definitely on the side of the artist in a sense that I think that it should always be about human creators, and anything that the companies do that abuses creators, that hurts them, um, is not acceptable. I don't know if this was helpful.
Yeah.
It's just tricky. A lot of the discourse is naive, and it's sort of benefiting another company. You think it's benefiting you, but really it's just benefiting the rights holders, right? And it's sort of you gotta think this through.
Have you heard any good arguments on the other side?
Being which other
The
side?
other
Yeah.
side would be that maybe in a philosophical space, in terms of collective consciousness, and in terms of ideas
Oh
being the
yeah. I
main
mean,
thing.
I can make that argument. I just don't know if I how much I support it. But the other argument is okay. Here's kind of another way I can argue it, in the way that I've argued it in the past, which again, big question marks. It's a problem is ownership, right? It's the way you eat in this world is by having money, right? And so if sharing without making money, it just has no space in the way that we've organized ourselves, right? Um, and so this opportunity that these models that are being created, which really belong to all of us to begin with, don't actually belong to all of us. These big companies are profiting from them. And so sometimes in this kind of like financially organized world where OpenAI is benefiting from this knowledge created by everybody, we end up hyper focusing on you must share the revenue with all of us because we've all created it, right? Which is really understandable. It's an understandable reflex. Of course, it ignores the fact that it's impossible to share with 10% of the internet, right? It's just not realistic. Um, but yeah, there is a lot of magical things happen when we are willing to aggregate our data and build a brain from them. And there's a lot of magic that happens, which sometimes we become blinded to because we are so worried about not getting our fair share. But all of it, every aspect of it is understandable. The reason we think this way is because our society forces us to think this way. Um, we don't know how else to be humans without trying to protect what's ours. And we don't know what to do when the only way to create something amazing makes it impossible to meaningfully share with everybody who contributed to the data set because the data set has to be too large. We don't have a precedent for it. We don't know what to do. It upsets us. It blinds us a little bit to the magic of what is being created because we're so upset that it's not being shared fairly. And so really there's no model for this. We as humanity don't know how to solve this. Really cool stuff is being created and not everybody who contributed benefits. And that's new territory for us.
I've heard some advocate for a solution where you have a model that has some kind of backtracking function, so that when you generate something, you could kind of trace where it came from, and then you could just share revenue based on the material it was trained on.
Okay, but it's not true though, right? Like I've heard this too. There is like it's an entire ecosystem, okay, of companies getting funding that have all kind of solutions to this problem because it's a real problem, right? But it's not realistic. It's entirely unrealistic, and it's not just a solution. And it's a cool idea, right? But it's a whole universe of solutions like it. There's like a whole set of them, and none of them make any respectfully. I feel that there are these serious shortcomings because if you think about the human brain, and in many ways these machine brains are similar, we have no idea what we're inspired by. I'm sorry, but we don't. We don't. We might think we do. It's like, let's say if you love Taylor Swift and you're a musician, you might be like, oh, I'm probably influenced by her. But probably you're influenced by whatever you heard as a little child. And good luck tracing it. Good luck tracing it. Like, it's just not how brains work. Brains don't know how they know stuff. Brains don't know what they're inspired by. And whatever system claims that it does know, probably does so with incredible inaccuracy. It might as well be making up what its source material are. And the ridiculous thing is that people might be happy with it. They might say, oh, they might just believe the system on how it attributes this. They might be happy that there is an attribution, even though most likely the attribution is false. Right? So it's really more of an attempt to appease this human need for fair attribution, for fair sharing of the pie, than it is a genuine fair solution. So this technology, we're not ready for it. Our economic and social systems are just not ready for it. And that's why I think, I mean, as a kind of temporary solution, if you will, let's just make sure that what it does in the end of the day doesn't hurt anybody, directly at least. That it doesn't imitate any specific artist. That you can't log in and say, give me music in the style of Maya Ackerman, and cut me out of the loop, not share anything with me, not ask for my permission, but have people be able to imitate me. That would make me upset. That would make any artist legitimately upset. Disallow that. Make that illegal. Make it so that these systems help human beings and don't displace jobs. Let's fix the real problems. Let's think about it for a second. Let's allow ourselves to think about it as a black box. For a second, let's forget about how it works and make sure that what it does is positive. Because when we try to tell the companies how to build their AI, most of us are operating respectfully in a field that we know nothing about. And so it's very, very easy to just say stuff that doesn't make sense and demand things that are not going to help, demand things that are impractical, and ultimately get nowhere, right? Instead, let's demand that these companies don't do things that are egregiously bad, thinking about it as a black box. I think that's a good point of view to integrate, even if people are going to continue thinking about data and trying to desperately find solutions to that. I understand that reflex, that desire, But we also need to be thinking about what is this AI actually doing in our world, because that's something that's obvious to us. That's something that we can demand control over. Different point of view. We don't tell people how to learn. We don't tell human beings how to learn, but we have a ton of rules of what you are and you're not allowed to do. So I think that perspective, the black box perspective, I'm not allowed to go out there and offer services. I'm going to write songs for you in the style of, I don't know, the Beatles or whatever. Like, I don't know. I think that would be illegal. I'm pretty sure. I'm not allowed to impersonate people. There's a lot of rules on what you are and what you're not allowed to do for human beings, even though we don't control how people's brains are formed and how they learn. And we kind of need to take that same attitude, at least in part, to AI, because I think we're going to get further, even as we try to figure out the other pieces.
All right. Maya Ackerman, everybody.
Oh, we got to some fun places there, didn't
Yeah,
we?
nice. But I mean, so I guess what you're saying is we as a whole or humanity or something needs to tell the companies what not to do and enforce kind of some rules about what we want AI to do with our music and do to our world. But do you think that is realistic?
I think any of it would be difficult because some of the AI companies are just really, really rich, right? So in that sense, it's very difficult. But telling them how to build the AI is even more difficult. It's even more difficult because I just see so many mistakes in the public discourse on what people assume is possible. People assume is realistic. That's just not. And I'm just not seeing that being productive so far. So far, it doesn't mean it's not worth the effort, but I'm not seeing it working. But going around and telling OpenAI, hey, don't use Scarlett Johansson's voice, Charlotte, even if you don't train on her data, don't imitate her voice. That was successful. They stopped doing that, right? And they finally stopped. And it wasn't clear it was going to work, but they did stop making it so easy. Like it used to be with Dali, you could say, give me art in the style of, insert your favorite artist or photographer. That's how they advertised their services initially. But they stopped doing that. Somehow that campaign was successful. So we're actually seeing some success telling companies, hey, we don't want your AI doing XYZ. Whereas a campaign saying, we don't want your AI built in way ABC, there have been some success, but that has been a really slow, really, really slow effort. So yeah, I don't care how someone's brains work. Don't break into my house. Don't do illegal things. Um, don't care, right? Like it's listen to my music, but don't claim to be me, right? Like it's we have a model when it comes to people.
And those were some good examples of public opinion shaping how these companies conduct their business. Could you imagine? Could you imagine some financial models that takes creators into consideration, and also is appealing to the public in terms of using?
Yeah, I mean, the part that I think leaves actually a really big opportunity is for the artists who are interested, only for those who are interested. And it's a very, very important piece of the puzzle. If somebody wants to offer up their style, if somebody wants to offer up their voice, which is such a personal, delicate decision, right? Not to be taken lightly, then I think there is a ways to compensate those artists really well, right? You say you go in and you say, I want a song. I'm just going to use my own name to not implicate anyone else, right? I want to use Maya's voice, right? Um, then I should be compensated for that. If I choose to engage in that. And I think for the bigger artists, there is an opportunity to make a lot of money. And even for smaller artists who have a really cool style or a really cool voice or whatever, something that they think other people will want to use in their songs, um, there's an opportunity to make a lot of money by collaborating with AI companies for the people who really want that kind of thing. Or maybe you're okay with people using your lyrical style and you're not okay with them using your voice, right? And that way you get to license exactly what you feel comfortable licensing. And then you can imagine if that becomes hot, suddenly millions of people are writing something in a way that leverages your style. And maybe that's exciting for you. And maybe it sounds absolutely I'm sure it sounds absolutely disturbing to a whole bunch of other people, and that's okay. Grimes already started leveraging that. People are making music using her voice, and last I looked, she gets half the royalties, and some songs have become successful. So there's already a precedent. Um, for people who want to get involved in that way. Or maybe an artist could develop a different sound, a different style, different from the one that they use, and they would want to license this new thing that they created. So there's really um, so much possibility here for how an artist could scale how many people they could kind of collaborate with through these AI systems. So there are exciting possibilities. There are ways to make money. But for most people, I hate saying it, but for most people, it's not going to be by just licensing their music, just because of how the economics work. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you can imagine, like if you need to license 10 million songs, 20 million songs to build a really powerful model, you can't pay hundreds of dollars per song. It's because of how much money are you really going to make on that model, and how quickly um, these numbers blow up very, very quickly, and companies need to operate within the constraints of what they're able to raise. Um, it's really terrible. It's a little bit upsetting for me to have to kind of verbalize all of this, but I think it's important for us as a society to understand the real bottlenecks here so that we can move in a direction that hopefully, at least ultimately, we're happy with. And maybe what you want to say then is, I hate these AI models. I don't want them at all, right? And that's a legitimate perspective as well. But whatever perspective you have needs to be sort of, it helps if it's informed by practicality.
I think we'll call that the final statement.
That's a fun final statement. Get rid of AI,
Yeah.
said the AI person.
So thank you so much for joining the podcast, Maya.
This was so fun. Thank you for the fantastic questions. Really enjoyed it.